So here's a sentence I say almost every day, either to my clients or to myself. Have very low expectations for yourself. And I know that might sound wrong or lazy because most of us were taught the exact opposite, right? So have high standards, push yourself, expect more from yourself, do better, be better. And, on paper, that sounds like the kind of mindset that should create success. But very often, it creates the exact thing people come to me for help with: procrastination, freezing, overthinking, panic, avoidance, and that horrible feeling of knowing you're capable of more, but somehow not being able to access it constantly or consistently. So, most high achieving people are not procrastinating because they don't care, right? They're procrastinating because they care so much and they're loaded so much expectation onto the day, the task, or themselves, that their system, their brain, starts reading performance as a threat. So let me paint you a picture. You wake up, and before the day has even really started, your mind is already making a mental note of everything that needs to happen, right? So maybe you write down a list, or maybe you don't. But either way, you already the calculation. I need to do this and this and this, and ideally that too. And at first, it can feel really productive. It can even feel responsible. But very quickly, something shifts. So you freeze, you get distracted, you start doing, maybe the easier things that was never the priority. So you're going to check your phone, you're going to reply to messages, you're going to tidy something, you're going to make a tea. If you're like me, you're going to make 15 teas. And suddenly you're doing anything but the thing, right? And the more this happens, the heavier the list is going to feel, right? So it starts to feel really threatening. It starts to feel like it's almost like swallowing you alive. And then because you haven't done what you expected yourself to do, pressure builds. And that pressure makes it even harder to start. So now you're in a loop. Pressure creates procrastination. Procrastination creates more pressure. More pressure creates more avoidance, and avoidance feeds the pressure. And most people in that moment make the wrong conclusion, right? They're going to think, I'm lazy, I'm undisciplined, me. Why can't I just get on with it? But that's not actually the problem. The problem is that the expectation was wrong from the start. And here's why this is important, because an expectation is not just a harmless thought. An expectation is a prediction. It's mind thinks is likely to happen based on the information that it has. So, example, if it gets dark outside, I might expect rain, right? I don't have a crystal ball, but I do have enough information to make a reasonable guess. That expectation is grounded in reality. But when you wake up and expect yourself to tackle every item on your list today, whether you do that consciously or not, you're doing something very different. You're acting as if that prediction is based on facts, where it usually isn't. Because unlike the weather, your day contains far too many unknowns. Your energy might drip, something urgent might happen, your child might get sick, a client issue might come up, your brain might simply not be in a state where, deep work is easy today. There are just so many variables. So, what you are calling an expectation is often just a guess, and not even a very good one. It's usually a fantasy based on pressure, not on reality. So, this is where things start going wrong, because once that expectation is set, your nervous system starts relating to it as though it should be possible. So, after all, you decided this morning, right? You put it on the list. You told yourself you could do it. So now, when the workload starts feeling big, or your focus drops, or something throws you off, there's a part of you that thinks, no, this shouldn't be hard. I should be able to do this. That is where the pressure is born, not from the list itself. It's born from the mismatch between the list in your head and the reality of the day in front of you. And this is why I say to my clients all the time that expectation is a thief of joy, but they're also a thief of productivity, because expectations close the mind. They narrow your vision. They make you focus on what is not happening instead of what is. They make you focus on the gap, not the progress or the next step. And once you're locked into that gap, your brain becomes far less useful. So instead of focusing on the task in front of you, it starts scanning for danger. I'm behind. This is too much. I'm failing. I'm wasting time. I'll never catch up. The list becomes the list you made in the morning, if you made one, it becomes emotionally loaded. And what happens when something feels what happens, when something feels emotionally loaded? We don't tend to move towards with ease, right? We avoid it. So the issue is in the list, and it's not that you're lazy. It's not that you need to try harder either. It's that the expectation is wrong. And because it's wrong, it doesn't match reality. And because it doesn't match reality, it creates pressure. And because it creates pressure, you freeze, which creates more pressure, right? So that's the cycle. And this doesn't just happen with productivity, by the way. It happens everywhere. So I'll give you an example of an actual example that actually happened to me. The other day, I came back from work late, and I walked through the door, and here's what comes through my mind. Why is the dishwasher still full from this morning? Why is my daughter Harlow not in her pajamas ready for bed? Why is the kitchen such a mess? And what are his shoes, my partner's, still doing in the hallway? And I was looking at him, my partner Sam, literally throwing daggers with my eyes. I was fuming. And in that moment, I was convinced that I was reacting to the circumstances, to the reality, to what I was seeing, but I wasn't. I was reacting to the gap between what I expected to see and what was actually there in front of me. And I couldn't see the full picture. I couldn't see that he'd been solo parenting this evening, that he'd done dinner, that he'd sorted the laundry, that actually he'd done a pretty good job juggling a lot. Couldn't see my daughter really excited to come and see me and give me a hug. All I could see was what was missing. I call this the expectation come down. When reality doesn't match the picture in your head and your mood drops accordingly. And then your mind puts on a filter that scans for what's wrong, what's missing, what's not good enough. And once that filter is on, everything starts to snowball. This is why expectations mess with performance so badly, because they distort perception. They don't just make you feel disappointed, they make you less able to see clearly. Now, this is where I want to make an important distinction. And this is one of the most important things I want to get today. High expectations do not just create pressure. They create emotional blindness. They make you less able to see what matters, what is enough, and what would actually help. So the issue is not just the high expectations feel unpleasant. The issue is that they put you away from clarity. Now, I want to make an important distinction. I am not saying have low aspirations. That is different, right? Aspirations are about what you want, what you wish for, what you hope for. where you want to go, the standard you care about, the life or work that you're building. Keep this as high as you want. Expectations are what you assume will happen. They need to be handled with a lot more care than aspirations. Because expectations assume certainty in a world that is not certain. They assume control where there often isn't much. And the more certain you are that something should happen a certain way, the more pressure you create when reality inevitably behaves like reality, which is messy, human, unpredictable. So, what's the alternative? Very low expectations. And I don't mean that in a depressing way. I mean it in a strategic way, in a way that protects your focus and builds momentum. So, this is the question I get my client to ask themselves in the morning. If everything goes wrong today, what is the one thing I'd like to have done so that this day doesn't feel like a complete write off? That's it. One thing, not 10, not the whole list, one thing. And I know for some people that sounds a bit dramatic, right? Or maybe even like you're selling yourself short, but it's not. It's intelligent because guess 99% of the time, you will do more than that. And 1% of the time, if the day genuinely goes sideways, you still win. And that means you're not carrying the feeling of failure into the next day and the next and the next. It means giving yourself the gift of starting fresh. And here is a little secret, just between us. What you are actually doing here is tricking your mind into believing there's only one thing to do today. And that instantly relieves pressure, which in turn propels you into action. That is why this works so well. It removes the threat. It gives your brain one target instead of 10 moving ones. And that changes everything because when the bar is realistic, action feels accessible, right? And when action feels accessible, you start. And when you start, momentum builds. One task leads to another, and then another, and then another. And by the end of the day, instead of feeling like you failed your imaginary plan, you feel like you know, you had overachieved even, and that feeling of overachieving creates a very different psychological state than the feeling of falling short. It builds trust instead of dread. It makes you want to go again tomorrow. And this isn't just about getting more done. It's about what repeated expectations do to your relationship to yourself. So maybe you know the feeling, when you've done a lot and you've been very productive, by probably by most people's standards, and yet somehow you get to the end of the day and it still feels like it wasn't enough. That is the damage that unrealistic expectations can do. Because when you start the day with a fantasy version of what should happen, and then reality does what reality does, you don't just lose your momentum, you also innocently reinforce the feeling that you are behind. Behind on the day, behind on your work, behind on your life, behind compared to who you think you should be. And if you do that often enough, it starts shaping identity. You start trusting yourself less. When your expectations are unrealistic, the day does not just feel hard. It teaches you to feel behind. And that's very different because now we're not just talking about productivity anymore. We're talking about self-trust. We're talking about quiet chipping at your confidence that happens when you keep falling short on a day that was never real in the first place. This is why lowering the bar is not about lowering your standards. It's about stopping the habit of training yourself to feel like a failure in your own life. So there you go. The real gift of lowering the bar isn't productivity. It's self-trust. It's ending the day feeling, I did what mattered today. It's teaching your mind, it's teaching your brain, your system that your day is not a failure just because it did not go exactly as planned. It's giving yourself evidence that you can rely on yourself. And here is the interesting paradox. The moment you stop expecting so much of yourself, you often start achieving more because you finally give your mind something it could actually work with. You give it clarity, focus, a realistic target instead of an abstract demand to be superhuman. And that's where productivity actually lives, not in pressure and clarity. So if you take one thing from today, let it be this. The problem isn't the list, and it's not that you're lazy. It's that the expectation is wrong. So tomorrow morning, write the list. Nothing wrong with the list. I love lists. But don't just write the list before you start mentally loading the day against yourself. Ask yourself, if everything goes wrong today, what is the one thing that would make this day still count? And make sure it's something that is doable, right now. If it's part of a bigger task, break it down and think about the one next step only. And then go about it as if this was genuinely the only thing you could do today. The only thing you have time, energy, headspace for a moment. And let that be enough. Because when enough becomes realistic, momentum comes back. So have fun with that. And do let me know how you get on. If there's any questions, is it something that I recommend to do every day? This. I recommend to do this every day. This is literally the first question I ask myself when I wake up in the morning. Like the first thing that comes to mind. And you will notice that when you ask yourself that question, there's a sense of like you're literally giving yourself permission to breathe. You're freeing up the space in your mind that was just loaded, especially us women, right? We are the mental load is real. We know that the mental load is real. It's not a fiction. It actually is real. This is what this question does for you. It takes care of that mental load. It gives you the opportunity to commit to something. Because this is about commitment as well. Something I forgot to say, it's about commitment, right? Committing to a task means focusing on one thing and do that only as if it was the only thing they could do. This is helping us do that. So start the day with that.